Hey! Yo, everyone, Andrew here, bringing you another video review, and today we're going to be doing Batman, Time in the Batman. Take a look at this comic cover right here. Now, Time in the Batman collects issues number 700 to 703 of Batman Comics. And it is three separate individual stories that bridge the gap between R.I.P., Final Crisis, and the return of Bruce Wayne. Now, the first story deals with Batman's past, present, and future. In that, Bruce Wayne as Batman, Dick Grayson as Batman, and a possible future with Damian as Batman must all work on the same case that spans a time of decades that deals with old Batman allies and enemies. The second story is considered the missing chapter from Batman R.I.P., in that it tells what exactly happened to Bruce Wayne after R.I.P. going into Final Crisis. How did he get from point A to point B, and how did he survive Dr. Hertz's attack? The last story is kind of a miscellaneous Batman story that's used more or less just to kind of bring back the idea in the Batman universe that Bruce is still out there. The characters are getting set for his return, which he did return, but they're getting used to the idea that Bruce may not be gone. The question is this, is how well does this really bridge the gap between R.I.P., Final Crisis, and the return of Bruce Wayne? And is it worth picking up? Well, wait 2 minutes and you'll see. On to the good, the bad, and whether or not you should get it. Good. Well, the first good is that one thing I do like about Grant Morrison is that he takes elements from older Batman stories from the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and the Golden Age, and he kind of updates them and brings them into the modern continuity. And they're nice little nods to older Batman stories. I enjoy that. For example, in this story, Batman, for Batman 700, has an old ally, a doctor, show up, and this doctor is able to send Batman and Robin back and forth through time. Now, what some people may not know is that's actually a character that was used during the Golden/Silver Age, or, somewhere in between, during the late 40s or early 50s. And, again, some people may not know that, but for someone like me who reads a lot of Batman, it's a nice little nod. And in addition to that, it's kind of cool how he can take very campy story elements and transition them over into the current modern continuity and have them actually make sense and fit. I'll give credit to Grant Morrison in that. In addition to that, it's nice to actually know what happened between R.I.P. and Final Crisis. Took long enough, but they actually did a good job for this. Grant Morrison did something that I kind of wanted to see happen, in that he gives Bruce Wayne's perspective on his final moments before being sent back in time by the Omega Sanction. What he was thinking, how he was losing his memory, how he was going about stuff. It was good to see things through Bruce's perspective. Because one thing about Final Crisis that did bug me is that whole scene between him and Darkseid was just kind of there. It happened and that was it. You really didn't get too much of a feeling from it. Any feeling that you would have got from it, you got from interviews from Grant Morrison, where he tells you, well, this represents Bruce and how he feels about the gun and how he's fighting the ultimate evil. Well, I mean, yeah, you're telling us that, but I guess we could kind of figure that out, but it would have been nicer if we just got the inner dialogue that we had here in that story. But for the most part, it's nice to actually see that, and they also show how the hyper-adapter is being sent back in time, and Bruce's actual methodology for using the gun, and how it was planned to only get rid of Darkseid and not to kill the human host, which was Dan Turpin, I think. Another good is that the art in this is good. It's done by Tony Daniel, who is a fantastic artist. There's a few other artists in here, but the one thing I have a problem with is that some of Tony Daniel's art doesn't actually look like it's art. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's another artist, they did transition over from artist to artist, but it did seem a little off. But for the most part, the art was good, and it felt right for what these stories were. Bad. Well, the first bad is something that I always harp on Grant Morrison about. And this doesn't always happen in all of Grant Morrison's stories, but it does happen from time to time. In that Grant Morrison sometimes writes people's dialogue between each other like they never had a conversation in their life. Sometimes the dialogue is so cold, methodical, and emotionless, it's like robots talking to each other. Oh my god. Again, this doesn't always happen, but it does happen sometimes with Grant Morrison. And I've been noticing it a lot in his Batman work. Not so much with his JLA stuff, more or less with his Batman. And worst offender of all was Batman The Return of Bruce Wayne, where there was no emotion at all in the dialogue. Feels as though these characters just don't know how to talk. It isn't as bad in here as it could be, but it's still noticeable. The dialogue could have still been a little bit better. Again, I harp on Grant Morrison a lot about this, and it's not all the time that he does this, but still, the dialogue could have been better. He's a great stories person, does fantastic overall stories, just he's not a good dialogue person. It's like the opposite of Gail Simone. I made this comparison before, in that Grant Morrison can really tell good, complex stories over a long period of time, but he doesn't have the dialogue for those stories, where Gail Simone can't tell complex stories over a long period of time, but she can pull dialogue off. Be nice if you can mix them together into one bald female writer. That's creepy. But anyways, moving on. One of my biggest gripes with Grant Morrison is how he tells his overall complex stories, and that he does a fantastic job at having these integral, detailed stories, and then he kind of just gives it to us in a mess. For example, why am I getting Batman R.I.P. The Missing Chapter right now? Why didn't I get it after I finished R.I.P.? Why didn't I get it before I read Final Crisis? It would have answered a lot of questions for me. It would have helped things out. It would have made reading easier. I mean, yeah, we could kind of piece things together, but people don't want to be thinking that much. Well, not always. I mean, I like to be challenged by some reading, but when you absolutely omit information, it's annoying. For example, I'm taking business finance right now in college, and we just had a test. And in the test, we had to deal with balance sheets, and you have to get cost of goods sold and sales and all that junk. The thing is that the interest was missing. So technically, you're supposed to work backwards. And to find the interest, you have to have sales and all this stuff, and kind of just basically to get 4, you have to find out what 2 plus what is. Okay? But the problem is we don't even get what we need to find the interest. How are we going to figure out the story if you don't actually give us the stuff we need to try to figure out the story? I know that was kind of a complex description and a not so reliable analogy, but for example, your teacher gives you 4, so 2 plus something equals 4. To find out what 4 is, you do 2 minus 4 to get the answer. No? But the problem is you give us the answer that is 4, you don't tell us what makes 4. Again, I hope that makes sense, but it's just Grant Morrison always throws stories around. We have a story here for R.I.P., then it goes into Final Crisis, but there's a missing chapter that we'll get in Time in the Bat, and then you have Return of Bruce Wayne, which is coinciding with Batman and Robin's issues number 13 to 16, which you have to read issue number 14 before you can read issue number 6, and you have to read issue number 5 before you go into issue number 15, and it's just absolutely a complete mess. Why can't you just do it in one series? It sounds like I am harping on Grant Morrison a lot, and it sounds like I dislike Grant Morrison. That's not the case. But Grant Morrison is like all other writers, and he does have his faults. And his 2 biggest faults that I have with him is 1, dialogue, and 2, just organizing the freaking stories. Besides that, he does fantastically complex stories, does a good job integrating elements from other Batman stories into his stories, and he's good as a writer. He just needs to work on that stuff. Lastly is I wasn't too impressed by Batman issue number 700. It wasn't particularly bad, but it didn't blow me away. It's kind of like with Superman number 700. A lot of people pumped out to be really good, and it was just okay. It makes my expectations for Wonder Woman issue number 600 to be actually kind of lower. And I'm not really looking forward to that because that leads into the big continuity race. But issue number 7 was just okay. The question is whether or not you should get it. Not really. I mean, if you really want to fill in the gaps between R.I.P., Final Crisis, and Return of Bruce Wayne, this does help out. But it doesn't really tell us too much that we don't already know. A few things here and there, but if you were getting this just for good Batman stories, don't get it. If you see it in your store and you're like, hey, maybe I should pick that up, it looks like it would be a fun read, don't bother. It's not bad, it just doesn't particularly work in that way. However, if you're in your comic store and you say, well, that would probably help out my Grant Morrison reading of Batman, then yes, then you would pick it up. On the whole, I'm just okay with this. It didn't really impress me too much, but it didn't hurt me that much either. It was just kind of there. So, final analysis, if you're looking for a good Batman story, avoid it and get something else. However, if you're looking to help out with your Grant Morrison Batman reading, pick it up. So with that said, this is Andrew saying peace out for now.